Hi guys, this is part 23 of the Irrational series. Full series playlist linked below.
Are you sure she still has the same quirk she's always had?
You blinked open your eyes at the sound of your dad's voice. Two figures talked quietly in the doorway of your dark hospital room, their outlines framed by the bright hallway lights. Dad, and was that Tsukauchi? Positive, the man said. Tsukauchi's voice. It was him. Your ears twitched, but otherwise you pretended to stay asleep. Aizawa sighed.
Then what's going on?
You were surprised by the hint of anger in his voice. Tsukauchi flipped through a case notebook as he replied. The lab has a guess. In the past, when you've tried to cancel Eiko's quirk, nothing happened no matter which form she was in. But have you ever tried using erasure while she shapeshifts?
Why would that matter?
Aizawa frowned.
Are you saying that erasure does work on her quirk? But that would mean...
The only time she uses her power is when she shapeshifts, Tsukauchi finished. Her shapeshifting transforms her into another heteromorph form, one that your erasure doesn't affect, until she uses her power to shapeshift again. Aizawa's frown deepened.
I've never encountered a quirk like that. Shapeshifters are always power-up types, and erasure changes them back to their base form.
That's because Eiko is the only documented case of this. Or at least, the only one who has lived. The air temperature around Aizawa dropped abruptly.
What do you mean?
He asked in a voice that made glaciers seem warm. You could hear your heartbeat in the silence. Tsukauchi shuffled through the notes he had. There have been a dozen or so documented cases, but they all died before reaching their first birthday. Papers were published on it. The consensus seems to be that a heteromorph shapeshifter has a mutation in their quirk genes from a mutagen they were exposed to at a young age or even before birth.
How did the mutation kill the others?
Aizawa demanded. A typical body cell can be replaced about 40 to 60 times before it undergoes programmed cell death. The amount of times it can be replaced has to do with the length of the telomeres, or extra DNA. The longer the telomeres are, the more times the cell can replicate. Anyways, for most people, being able to replace their cells around 40 times is plenty for a long life. But a heteromorph shapeshifter completely destroys and replicates every cell in their body each time they shapeshift. They reach their cellular turnover limit in an unnaturally short time. As more and more cells in their body permanently die, their vital organs eventually fail. It's the same way people die of old age, just quicker.
Eiko has shapeshifted a lot more than 60 times,
Aizawa countered sharply.
What makes her different from the others?
Tsukauchi shrugged. I'm just telling you what the lab researchers told me. They were very keen to take her down to the lab for a couple months to run tests on her, but I didn't think you would approve.
Over my dead body,
Aizawa snapped with unnecessary vehemence. Tsukauchi raised his hands in surrender. No need to worry. I told them it was unlikely.
So how did the drug injections from the villain attacks factor into this?
Sorry, Eraser. I don't know. All that the lab figured out is that the drug targets quirk genes. Maybe the drug caused the mutation. Or maybe she's always had the mutation and the drug is actually keeping her alive. There is another idea.
Which is?
Well, one of the lab techs is pretty insistent that it's a quirk destabilizer. But why would the villains want to do that? And it wouldn't explain how she's alive.
I'd like to talk to that lab tech.
If you think it would be useful, you just have to call the lab.
I'll do that. How's the infiltration going?
We almost got one of our agents in, but it looks like this organization is more ambitious than we assumed. They're only recruiting people with impressive quirks, so we're pulling someone from the Public Safety Commission to pick up where our agents left off.
The Public Safety Commission?
Aizawa frowned.
Won't they try to take over the case?
Tsukauchi shrugged. They're just letting us borrow one of their people. It's never gone wrong before. Aizawa sighed.
If I were superstitious, I'd say you just jinxed us.
But you're not, Tsukauchi said dismissively. You tried to keep listening, But the strange feeling was washing over you again. You fought the rising panic. Last time, Aizawa stopped it with erasure. You didn't want to give away the fact that you were awake, but what would happen if... Your view spun and you found yourself in a mess of sheets and flailing paws, letting out an involuntary meow as you fell out of the hospital bed. Even with the sheets tangled around you, you managed to land on your feet. You wriggled and struggled to get free. The conversation between Aizawa and Tsukauchi cut off abruptly, and then Aizawa was lifting the sheets off of you with a frown. Eiko. His hair lifted above his crimson stare. But you stayed a cat. Tsukauchi peered at you curiously over his shoulder. Does this happen often? Aizawa blinked, hair falling back around his shoulders. It shouldn't. Not when she's had food and rest. You tried to say, I'm not tired, but it came out as meows. You pouted, which just looked like your tail lashing. Aizawa stared at you blankly, then leaned back on his heels, at a loss. Don't worry, Eiko. We'll figure this out. The strange feeling came over you again. You meowed in alarm as the room spun, but then you were your human cat-ood self, kneeling dizzily on the floor in your hospital gown. Aizawa's hands on your shoulders steadied you. I'm not tired, you said immediately. Aizawa relaxed. Glad to know that's what you were trying to say, he correctly inferred. Tsukauchi hovered over his shoulder with a curious expression. He'd heard that you could shapeshift, but he'd never seen it in person before. If she can't control her shapeshifting, this might support the theory of... Aizawa shot him a glance and he cut himself off. I hope you feel better soon, Eiko, Tsukauchi said instead, tipping his hat and heading out hastily. Later, Eraserhead. His footsteps faded away. He was about to say quirk destabilization, wasn't he? You asked once he'd left. Aizawa froze. How much did you hear? You shrugged. You said we would talk more once I was feeling better, right? Well, I feel great. You grinned to demonstrate. Aizawa glowered at you with obvious concern. The last time you said that, you immediately lost consciousness. So forgive me for being skeptical. You sighed. How long would it take to get him to tell you everything? You shivered in your thin hospital gown, and Aizawa's hair flared up. It's not the shapeshift feeling, you hastily explained. I'm just cold. The red glow vanished from Aizawa's eyes as suddenly as it had appeared. If you feel a shapeshift coming on, tell me immediately. You hesitated. What if it happened a lot? Wouldn't it be a pain to always run to Aizawa? But he seemed really serious about this. Okay, you muttered. Over the next couple days, you discovered 3 things. First, Tsukauchi's hunch about Eraser was correct. Aizawa could stop you from shapeshifting. But once you shifted, he couldn't do a thing. Second, you could still shapeshift at will. If you turned into a cat, you could turn back again as soon as the odd feeling passed. Third, you were right. Agreeing to Aizawa's rule was a huge pain. You were released from the hospital shortly after you woke up. Once you got home, you started up the stairs. Aizawa's voice stopped you. Where are you going? You turned to look over your shoulder at him. To do homework in my room? Aizawa gave you a lidded-eyed stare. And how? He reasoned. Will you tell me when to cancel your quirk, if you don't stay within speaking distance? Your eyes widened in disbelief. Are you saying that I have to stay right next to you, like, all the time? Logically. What? How? What about when you go to meetings? You'll come with me. What about when I'm sleeping? I'll sleep on the floor in your room. Don't you have night patrols? I've already brought the other heroes and vigilantes up to speed so they can cover for me. What about... You felt a sense of horror at the thought. When I'm showering... You can call for me and put your hand out from behind the curtain, if necessary. Even just seeing your hand is enough for erasure to work. Are you kidding me? No. Aizawa glowered, hair lifting as his eyes blazed red. I'm not. The emotion in his usually emotionless voice unnerved you. He didn't even seem aware that he was using his quirk. You tried to be calm, rational. That was the way to change Dad's mind. You took a deep breath. For how long? You asked, trying to sound reasonable. Aizawa was silent for a minute. At least a couple weeks. After that, we'll see. You almost freaked out again. So long! But you needed to stay level-headed and figure out Dad's reasons. Okay, you agreed. For now. Aizawa hovered protectively as you got your homework supplies and brought it back downstairs. You sat side by side at the table with him. He graded papers while you did your homework. He only had to cancel your quirk once. You called Shinso as soon as you caught up on everything. It was annoying how Aizawa had to be in earshot, but oh well. Shinso picked up right away. How are you feeling? Was his immediate question. You grimaced. Fine. Great, actually. But I think I scared Dad. Well, you scared me. I'm sorry about that. I get it. But at the same time, I just want everyone to quit worrying about me. It's excessive. Shinso paused on the other end. How so? You were fully aware that you were complaining about Aizawa right in front of him, but he didn't seem to care. He calmly made another mark on a paper. I have to stay within speaking distance of Dad, you explained sullenly, so that he can erase my quirk. Shinso sounded taken aback. I see. You glared at the ground in grumpy silence. I'll come visit you sometime, Shinso assured. Good. I've missed you too, he said lowly, and the line went dead. You stared at the phone in confusion. Had you said that you'd missed him? You had, but he was jumping to conclusions. So cocky. The next few days crawled by at a snail's pace. Aizawa's rule was driving you crazy. Ever since adopting you, he'd always been super chill. He'd had a few logical rules, but they still allowed you plenty of freedom, independence, and privacy. Now, you had practically none of that. Every time the shapeshift feeling started, all it took was, Dad, before he reacted, eyes flashing red and his erasure quirk evaporating the feeling away. You started to hate it every time the feeling began. The sensation itself wasn't so bad. The thing that made your stomach clench in dread was having to ask for help. Every time you called for Dad, you felt like you were admitting that all the chafing precautions and restrictions were necessary. And to top it all off, he still hadn't told you what was going on. He claimed that he couldn't yet. What's so dangerous about me turning into a cat for a minute? You complained, feeling angry as Aizawa denied your request to go to Jiro's to play guitar. Why are you being so paranoid? Aizawa remained calm in the face of your outburst. His tired dark eyes flickered with indecision. You're not that hard to read, you snapped. I can see right through you, trying to decide what to tell me and what not to tell me. What's so terrible about the truth? Can you just forget about deception, rational or not, and talk to me? You stood panting after your outburst. Aizawa interrupted calmly. We don't know what other ways the drug might affect your quirk. I will give you more information, but I need to clear it with someone first. You didn't know what to say. Tears of frustration pricked at your eyes. Aizawa examined you impassively. You can have some time to yourself, he said abruptly. Right now. Your eyes widened. Really? Yes. What if I start to shapeshift? Do I still have to? No, I'll let it slide, just for the next hour. You didn't wait for him to change his mind. You ran up to your room to grab a jacket, paused, considering how jumping out your window would be a faster exit, but decided to take the long way, dashing back downstairs and out the front door instead. Aizawa had acted oddly that one time you'd entered school through the classroom window, and you didn't want to do anything that might change his mind about your hour of freedom. Aizawa's point of view. He'd been thinking about what Tsukauchi said ever since you'd been released from the hospital. Every time you shapeshifted, it shortened your lifespan. How many more times could you shapeshift before it started to kill you. There was no way to know. Keeping you possessively by his side to stop the random shapeshifting was hardly a sustainable solution, but in less than a week, he'd bailed you out of jail for a crime you hadn't committed. He'd attacked you with his own hands, under the control of a villain, and he'd seen you black out repeatedly, only to learn that your quirk might kill you. He'd already been on edge. That knowledge had been the last straw. He felt massively overprotective. He heard the door slam behind you as you dashed outside to enjoy your hour of freedom. He made his way to the rooftop, sitting down tiredly and pulling out his phone. Amaya Shinso answered after a few rings.
Hi, Aizawa.
Hi, Amaya. Have you decided? There was a pause.
Yes,
she said.
I'm going to tell him.
It hadn't been an easy decision, as evidenced by the slight strain in her otherwise calm voice. Let me know if there's anything I can do, Aizawa offered.
Keep an eye on him,
Amaya said quickly.
He might have a hard time.
I understand, Aizawa assured. After the call ended, he sat looking at the view from the rooftop, resisting the urge to go find you and make sure you were safe. He organized his thoughts. Katsumi Shinso had always been at the center of your case. He was the one who had placed you in the care, if you could even call it that, of the abusive Taro Teshima. He was the one who had attacked you as a child. He was the one who had attacked you again, just this week, by controlling Aizawa himself. You were smart. You were asking questions. Curiosity killed the cat, the saying went. Aizawa intended to satisfy your curiosity before you poked your nose into dangers you didn't understand. And he couldn't bring you up to speed without telling you about Katsumi. There was just one big problem. Katsumi was the father of your best friend. Your best friend who still didn't know that his father was a villain, much less the villain who had wreaked havoc on your life. Aizawa didn't want to burden you with keeping a secret of that magnitude from Hitoshi. Even if he asked you to, you might not. Of course, he could always tell you about Katsumi without telling you he was Hitoshi's father. But with the villains on the move, it was bound to come out. Keeping the secret would just give the villains the perfect way to throw you off balance during a fight. So, shortly after promising to tell you more about what was going on, Aizawa called and explained the situation to the head of the Shinso household, Amaya Shinso. She'd asked for a few days to think. Aizawa had agreed. It had been her decision and burden to keep the knowledge of Katsumi's villain status from her son, and now it was her decision and burden to tell him. Your point of view. For the last 3 days, you'd wanted nothing more than to be alone. But after 10 minutes of leaping around rooftops and visiting your favorite trees and views, you wanted to see your friends. Of course, you'd seen them at school, and you'd texted them. But you hadn't genuinely hung out with anyone since your hospital release. You scrolled through your text messages, deciding who to call. Maybe Shinso? No, he was working in the bike shop tonight. The last time you visited him while he was at work, he'd been swamped by enthusiastic bikers wanting his tips and tricks for a perfect tuning. You smiled at the memory of a slightly harassed-looking Shinso speaking rapidly to a group of muscular athletes who peppered him with questions and hung on to his every word. Your phone dinged with a text from Mina. Iko, we miss you! We're having a gaming night at Bakugo's place, and Denki is being an idiot. It would be so much better if you were here. You grinned. That settled it. You'd never actually been to Bakugo's place. You'd been invited to gaming nights there, but had always declined due to your inherent dislike for the explosive blonde, choosing to go only whenever it was at Kiri's or Mina's or anyone else's place. You stared up at the large domed entryway, the light stucco walls, and dark modern window trimmings. The house was almost big enough and nice enough to fall into the mansion category, very different from your own suburban house with Dad. Feeling slightly intimidated, you rang the doorbell. A woman's voice shouted for Bakugo to get the door, and you could hear the unmistakable voice of Bakugo yelling back that he already was. Had he just called his mother a hag? You were still processing the unusually aggressive Bakugo family dynamic when Katsuki Bakugo opened the door. The ash blonde wore black sweats and a tank top that showed off his muscled arms. His almost neutral expression contrasted the intensity in his crimson eyes as he took in the sight of you. Thank you for listening to Part 23. Part 24 coming soon. Have a rocking week.